Welcome to Poetry Lockdown, day 109. I'm coming to you today with poem Raisin by Gregory Pardlo. One of the fun and really rewarding things about doing a many day video series on poems is you just realize, oh my goodness, some of these poems are talking to each other in really cool and interesting ways. You'll remember just a couple of days ago, I read that fantastic poem by Father Joseph Brown, Peter Remembers. Um, and if you recall, right, there's that line, what is left to love? There's nothing left to love. And just as I was reading it, I really heard the echoes of this really key line from A Raisin in the Sun. And lo and behold, Father Brown, who heard my reading and interpretation, that was true. Like that was really what he was looking to resonate. He's got this incredible experience with the play, which I won't get into. Um, but anyways, at the same time that I was reading and engaging with this poem by Father Brown, I've also been reading the work of Gregory Pardlo, a fantastic poet. I mentioned him earlier in that interview with Rowan Ricardo Phillips. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. His collection Digest is excellent. I haven't actually read the whole collection because I don't have it, but I've read many of them just on the internet. But I have read his memoir too, Air Traffic, and he's really interested in relationships between fathers and sons, which I think is a good way to introduce this poem, which is about a raisin in the sun, and it's called Raisin. So with that little intro, I'm going to jump right into it. Raisin by Gregory Pardlo. I dragged my 12-year-old cousin to see the Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun because the hip-hop mogul and rapping bachelor Diddy played the starring role. An aspiring rapper gave my cousin his last name and the occasional child support, so I thought the boy would geek to see a pop hero in the flesh as Walter Lee. My wife was newly pregnant and I was rehearsing, like Diddy, swapping fictions, surrendering his manicured thug persona for a more domestic performance. My cousin mostly yawned throughout the play, except the moment Walter Lee's tween son stiffened on stage, as if rapt by the sound of a roulette ball. Scene. No one breathes as Walter Lee vacillates, uncertain of obsequity or indignation, after Lindner offers to buy the family out of the house they purchased in the all-white suburb. Walter Lee might kneel to accept, but he senses the tension in his son's gaze. I was thinking, for real though, what would Diddy do? Get rich or die trying, 50 Cent would tell us. But my father would sing like Ricky Skaggs, don't get above your raisin, when as a kid I vowed to be a bigger man than him. The oppressive fruit dropped heavy as a medicine ball in my lap meant to check my ego, and I imagined generations wimpling in succession like the conga marching raisins that sang Marvin's hit song. Silly, I know. Outside the theater, my cousin told me when Diddy was 2, they found his hustler dad draping a steering wheel in Central Park, a bullet in his head. I shared what I knew of dreams deferred and Marvin Gaye. When asked if he loved his son, Marvin Sr. answered, let's just say I didn't dislike him. Beneath the bling of many billion diodes, I walked beside the boy through Times Square, as if anticipating a magic curtain that would rise. But only one of us would get to take a bow. All right. This poem really shook me up and has so many really interesting twists and turns. And like I said at the beginning, all of them revolving around this very interesting tension between father and son. So I just want to share with you something. So I teach high school English, as many of you know, and I teach the play Raising the Sun. My students junior year read this play, and we discuss it. And I think I mentioned when I read Father Brown's poem that moment when Walter Lee decides to say no to Mr. Lindner. We are, we are going to move into that neighborhood, and we are not going to take your money. It's an incredibly emotional moment. I find myself in tears every time I watch it. And I was saying in the last one, I think part of the reason I, as a reader or as a viewer, always saw as the reason for Walter Lee's transformation is because of how inspired he is by Mama's words, which he's off stage, but he can hear her saying that, right? To Beneath, defending him and saying, there's always something left to love. And I remember I had a really interesting discussion because many of my students were like, no, Mr. Saya, that's what they called me. Mr. Saya, that's not why Walter does what he does. He does it because his son is standing right in front of him, and he does not want to embarrass and shame himself for life in front of his son. And so I realized, like, when they said that, like, oh, I never thought about that. But then looking at this poem by Gregory Pardlo, it occurs to me that he's reading in a similar way. And so it's not like one of us is right or wrong. I don't think that. I think what this poem it really illustrates for me as a reader and as a viewer of that play, which is just, it's just gotten under my skin in a great way. Is that motivations that for human beings, actions are always complex, especially big actions, and honestly kind of impure, and there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean there isn't an incredible transformation for the character. It's just the beginning of the road for him. But that there might have been multiple reasons for why, and not all of them might have been pure and amazing. Just like this poem ends on really, like, only one of us would get to take a bow, this note of rivalry. And to bring it all the way back home, back to Father Brown's poem, it just got me thinking. Father Brown's poem is really about the last chapter of the Gospel of John, and Peter is on the shore. He gets that triple forgiveness from Jesus. He's feeling great. But the last thing Jesus says to him, I looked this up in John 21, is truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Okay, not something he's super pleased about. And then the very next thing Peter says, because John is there, he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, and he asked him, Lord, what about him? And Jesus is like, that's none of your business. And I just find that really encouraging, actually, that even in one of the last verses of John's gospel, there's a little pettiness, a little rivalry already, sort of creeping in. Some people might find that scandalous. I don't. I just think that's again part of this idea of motivations are always mixed and complicated. So that's my weird, complicated interpretation, kind of mixing and melding two amazing poems. And if you haven't checked out Father Brown's poem, that was, I think, day 106, just a couple back. Peter Remembers, really recommend it. It's totally talking to this poem in cool ways. Thank you, Gregory Pardlo, for this fantastic poem. Thank you all for listening. Hope you have a great night.